Here's a sneak peek for this week's episode.
When you're traveling with a group of people, whether it be once or multiple times, there's always that give and take. Just give and not necessarily take, because it's going to make it for a more enjoyable experience with everybody when everybody gets a little bit of what it is that they want and are looking for out of that trip.
I'm Scott.
And I'm Melissa.
And we are the Sunshine Travelers. Our passion is travel and sharing our experiences with those who enjoy it as much as we do, or those who want to learn more about travel, or even those who just want to live vicariously through our travel stories. No matter where you fall along that journey, get ready to hear about our firsthand experiences as we visit some of the most interesting and amazing places on Earth. This week, we explore the topic of group travel. Melissa and I mostly travel just the two of us, so we wanted to bring in some experts to talk through the dynamics of group travel and share their experiences. They will give us some great tips on planning group travel, options for organized group travel, and a few tips to make group travel successful. One of the things we've talked to many of our friends and listeners about is traveling as a group of friends. Everyone has their preferences when it comes to travel. Some people like to get up early and see as much as they can, while others prefer to have some downtime. Some like to eat early, others like to eat late. Some like to grab a quick bite, and others want a leisurely meal. Some like to have everything planned and make reservations, while others prefer to go with the flow. Then there's the topic of budget for the trip. It's one thing to travel as a couple, but adding friends to the mix and keeping everyone happy is a whole other story. Today, we are talking with a group of friends who do just that and record their experiences on a podcast. Please join me in welcoming Kim, Brittany, and Jamal, the Travel Squad podcast, to our show.
Ooh,
welcome.
Hello. Thanks for having us.
We are so excited to be here. Thank you, Scott and Melissa, for having us on this podcast today.
Yeah, it's a real honor. We're really excited to be here with you guys.
So this is the first time that we've actually talked to multiple people at the same time on our podcast. So we're really excited about this. Usually it's a one-on-one or two-on-one conversation for us. So this is going to be fun and exciting.
It is exciting. And on our end, too, we don't do a lot of interviews on other podcasts. So this is special for us.
Well, let's let you guys introduce yourselves, talk a little bit about you guys, and then kind of go into when and how you started traveling together as a group of friends.
So Kim and I met back when we were 12 years old. And so we've been friends for a really, really long time. And I actually met Jamal when I was 17. We worked at a Target together, and Kim was my best friend. Jamal and I were dating. So the group of us started to hang out. But really, our relationship started to develop when we all moved down to San Diego, because by this point, we were all adults and we started to want to travel a little bit more. And Kim and I, for budget purposes, we would hike to explore places. So we did a lot of hiking. We hiked all throughout San Diego, and we were just talking about all of our hiking adventures. And we decided that we were going to make it a goal to hike Machu Picchu. So we did exactly that. We hiked Machu Picchu, but we wanted to hike I didn't want to leave Jamal out. And of course, Kim didn't want to be a third wheel. So we invited another friend along, Jamal's sister, and we all did this great epic trip to Machu Picchu. We did the hike on the Inca Trail. And from there, our travel started. And then on a trip, Kim actually came up with the idea of the podcast.
And that Machu Picchu trip was actually my first time ever going on an international trip. I never did a lot of traveling growing up. I was 26 years old when we took that trip to Peru. And immediately after, we planned another trip to Mexico City. And then it was just bang, 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 trip after trip after trip for a good 3 years until we were in Mexico City again and happened to start talking about this travel podcast. I had fallen in love with podcasts, as fellow podcasters yourselves. You probably listen to a lot of shows too. All day long, I listened to them. And so they were in my ear and I was like, you guys, we have to talk about this. The excitement of travel is it's palpable and we have to share this. And like Brittany said at the time, we weren't rich. We still aren't rich now by any means, but we were managing to go on all of these trips month after month after month, US trips, hiking trips, international trips, all of it. And so we just knew we had something we wanted to share and we did it.
Yeah, Kim was the brainchild really behind it. And I won't lie, we were at a wedding. So we were, I don't want to say inebriated, but we had a few drinks in us. So we had the liquid courage. And when Kim came up with the idea, we were all feeding off of each other saying, yeah, this is going to be great. People ask us all the time how we do it. And like Kim alluded to, I mean, obviously one of the biggest hindrance of being able to travel a lot is money, but we always had little travel hacks or certain things that we would do to save. And so we thought that would just be a great platform to tell people about it since everyone always asks us. And of course, share the fact that we're all traveling together as a group because not a lot of people really do that. And that's something that we all did that was unique.
And you did it a lot too, right? So it wasn't just like, oh, this trip. I mean, it sounds like there at the beginning, like you did lots of trips together, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So our first one that really kicked it off was to Peru, where we hiked the Inca Trail to Machu Picchu. And then after that, Kim mentioned we went to Mexico City to visit a friend, but we also went to China together. We went to Ecuador together. We actually just got back from Costa Rica together. And then we did some domestic trips too. We went to Idaho and some other states where we road tripped around and traveled as this group. So we were trying to
national parks, which is a huge part of what we still talk about.
Right. Yes, I do notice that is that you guys, which is something that we want to do more of. And so like just seeing your content and having your content, listening to your content on the, in the national parks is such a great resource for people, right? Because I think that is a very popular thing within the US for people to go do.
On one of our most recent podcasts, we talked about that when people ask us, like, what's your favorite place you've ever visited? It's easy for us because we can spout off somewhere internationally that we traveled to. Mm-hmm. But recently we had someone say, what's your favorite domestic place? And we stumbled. We were like, and it's like, how can travel podcasters not be able to answer that question? But the reality is that we just love traveling internationally.
So on that you prefer international, but the US is so underrated. There's so many beautiful hidden gems in this country.
Oh, absolutely. Without a doubt.
There really are. And that's the thing about America. I mean, we really are a young country. So when you're comparing cities, and that's, of course, if you're thinking cities, international is the way to go because there's hundreds, if not thousands of years of history, whereas here in the US, we don't. So kind of going back to the national parks, that's why we really love exploring America via the national parks, because you really get to see its natural beauty that way. I feel like only a handful of cities in the US really have that kind of character that you could maybe find internationally. Otherwise, a city's a city here. So I don't necessarily disagree with you. Sometimes international may be better if you're going the city route.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And matter of fact, we've even said, like, as long as we can get out and go and, we have our health and stuff like that, like, we want to go as far as we can. And then when we can't travel quite as far, that's when we'll go out in our backyard more often and stuff like that. But you're 100% correct. There's a ton of hidden gems. And that's why we like talking to fellow travelers, because you guys come and tell us about the places that you've been. And we're like, oh, yeah, now we got to add that to our list. That's something else.
Yeah. And you guys are avid hikers. But I wanted to just say, wow, the first international trip to Machu Picchu. That's like quite a wow.
Jamal always gets mad at me because that's technically not true. Technically, I went from San Diego to Rosarito, which is a 30-minute drive across the border, a week before this Peru trip with a group of girls. We didn't have phones working. We had handwritten directions of where to meet our friend. So that was technically my first little teaser into it, but Jamal doesn't consider that to be true, and he considers Peru.
Yeah, Peru was the real first one. She flew in versus crossed via land. So that's the real international travel right there. So I'm going to take credit that Brittany
and ended up in Mexico.
Yeah.
So then you said after Peru, it sounds like y'all started traveling to a lot of places. Now, so thinking about it like as a friend group and as like, lots of people with lots of different opinions, how did you start coming up with the ideas that you named off a bunch of places? for the trips, like where to go and what you guys wanted to do?
Well, I think it was a lot of different things. I think one was we would kind of throw out a name of a country or state and kind of see the reactions of other people and see if anyone kind of bit. So at one point, Jamal threw out China and we're like, okay, why not? And I think it was one that just kind of landed for us all. Because I think with us being a group of 3 or 4, you all have your own unique opinions about where to go to next. So first, we just kind of started throwing out ideas. And then once an idea stuck, we would just stick with that for a while, but also sales. A lot. We travel with on the West Coast with Southwest a lot. Southwest has a ton of sales for flights. And so I think one day we were coming off of a trip. We were in the airport. I was looking through my email.
That's where we always end up booking.
And so Southwest was having a sale and I just happened to look at like trip to Boise, Idaho. And I said, you guys, this flight is so cheap. And so in that moment, we booked that next trip while we were on one.
Yeah, we talk about that a lot, is that if you will, instead of picking a place where you want to go, if you'll look for those great travel deals, you can travel so much more. But if you've got in your mind a certain place that you want to go, then the cost of airfare is what the cost of airfare is going to be.
And there's always places that you're going to want to go to just book that trip. But one thing that we talk about on our podcast a lot and share is that we let the sales sometimes dictate. Like China, yeah, I wanted to go to China, but it was an international trip, flights, tours, hotel, everything included. If I remember correctly, because this was in 2017, but I don't think it was any more than $1,200, $1,300 per person. And I said, how can you go wrong for $1,300 to get all the way to China, spend 8 days there, and have an amazing time seeing all the history, eating the delicious food? And then Brittany alluded to Boise. It was a Southwest sale, but we do that a lot of times. Southwest sale. What's the closest airport to this national park? Can we find it? Are we going to be going hiking? And a lot of the times, to get back to your original question of where do we decide to go, coming off of Machu Picchu, yeah, that's a very strenuous hike, but we like to hike and we like nature and national parks. So a lot of times too, at least domestically, the choices were always geared around the national parks of where we would be going. And when we would go would really depend on the sale of the airfare when we can find it.
I think that's an awesome tip, right? Is to kind of have that list and then say, okay, when does this make sense based on the sales?
We're definitely millennials because that Boise trip was not just inspired by a sale, but it was inspired by a picture that Brittany and I saw on Instagram. People in these hot springs, they're natural hot springs, but formed pools just outside of Boise. It's snowing, but they're wearing beanies and bikinis. And we were like, we need to go to Boise for this. And we got the pic.
That's cool.
Nice.
Let me just ask the question what is your most memorable place that you guys have traveled together?
I think for me, it's the Inca Trail to Machu Picchu. It's not just that we traveled there together, but we spent 4 days on hiking. And we had never hiked. We had never backpacked. We had not camped in years. We were doing it at a high elevation. And then we were also joining, I think, 4 other groups or 4 other couples along the way. So we were completely out of our element. So to me, forming a bond with them as well as the other people we were with was so memorable.
And so how did that, what was that like? So meeting other people on the trip and they were hiking with you too?
Yes.
And then how did that, what was that like? That's super interesting to me.
It's something that we do a bit of, actually, these guided experiences. We'll do guided tours, which is actually what we did for China. So they kind of plan everything, take care of everything, but you're with people. It was the same for Machu Picchu. We partnered with Alpaca Expeditions and we showed up and we joined a group of, I think, 6 or so other couples. We were with them for the full 4 days. Some of them we even became such good friends with that when we were in Denver, a couple lived in Boulder. We went and had breakfast at their house and met their family. So even though we travel as a group together, we do a lot of these group type trips that make our group bigger. And I mean, we've had We met friends in China that are now still traveling with us. We met friends in Ecuador that we keep in touch with.
Very cool.
Yeah, that's really neat.
Yeah. So let me just ask while we're at this point. So besides the alpaca expeditions, is there other particular ones like that you are like that you're drawn to, companies that do that, or do you just kind of look to see of things that are of interest to you?
Well, Alpaca Expeditions is a specific vendor who's licensed to do the tours to Machu Picchu. In terms of guided tour companies that we use, if I'm understanding your question correctly right there, yeah, we love and use Gate One. We have only really used Gate One Travel for our group tours that we do, and I wouldn't recommend anybody else. We've always had a great experience with them. You can choose independent tours where the flights, hotels are included, but you're on your own to do whatever you want in the city that it lands you, or completely fully guided, like we talked about in China, or the Dalmatian coast when we've done Slovenia, Croatia, Montenegro. That was a fully guided. South Africa and Zimbabwe was fully guided. Gate One has always been great, and we've met so many friends on those tours that we keep in touch with or still continue to travel with, like Kim said.
There's two other companies I would toss in there that we haven't actually used, but Here and Now Travel is another one that caters more towards people under 40-ish or so. And
we can't go on that one.
they'll take any age. It's just, you'll probably be with a bunch of youngsters. But G Adventures is another one kind of like that. I'm actually eyeing a Iceland tour with them in December.
Nice. That's good to catch some of those, because we do have people that are just, they want to show up and go on something. They don't want to figure it out on their own. They don't want to have to make all the arrangements.
Mm-hmm.
Melissa calls that me, but you know.
It's nice sometimes.
And then out of the three of you guys, who's the actual planner? Who's the one who spends most of their time doing all the planning, putting everything together? And how do you split that up?
I would definitely say I'm number one on planning, with Kim being my backup, but I will give Jamal credit in the fact that he does all of the planning in terms of airplane, trains, transportation. He is our transportation planner, but
he's the driver on trips.
He is the driver, but Kim and I do most of the actual planning, contributing to the Word document that we have ongoing and making sure things line up, and kind of like, I'll start to list out all of our ideas of places we want to go, and then we'll start to segment it by days and areas. And then usually I'll get that started first, Kim will then add on to it. And then if we have other people coming with us, usually they'll throw in an idea or two, but they're pretty laid back in the travel planning process.
And then once I have that template from Brittany and Kim, then I put it together to say, okay, are we taking trains if we're internationally? Or what's the best metro route? How do we get from here to there? That way, when we're already in country, I know what line we need to take from what station to what station, and it just makes it a whole lot easier. So I get the template and then I fine tune it, but really it's Kim and Brittany who are really coming up with all of the ideas of what we're going to do.
And I would say
Brittany's usually the one who's fulfilling the itinerary morning, noon, and night. And then I go in there to say, too much hiking. We need another rooftop bar in here. We need a Thai food restaurant. We need some downtime.
That's awesome. So you were reading my mind, because that was really going to be my next question, is how do you balance what everybody like in your group wants to do? And then how do you balance that, or how does that work on the tours that you do? Like, how can you like help people out?
When you're on a guided tour and you're not leading the experience, how does that work out?
Well, I would say when you're on a guided tour, it really is go with the flow. I mean, you really have no choice. So you just have to read the itinerary of the tour that you're booking ahead of time to know, like, okay, we're going from hotel to hotel. We're not even staying in one place 2 nights in a row, and it's just going to be go, go, go. Or some of them of the guided tours, they do have free days, or you're only doing something for half the day, then the other half of the day is at leisure. So you can fill that with relaxation or your own time to do something that you want that the tour's not doing. So I would say that one's easier to balance because of that, but also harder too, because at some point you really have no choice depending on how extensive of a tour that you booked. In terms of us traveling together, I'll let one of the ladies take that question too.
We've kind of developed a reputation for being travelers and planners, and the people that come along on the trips with us, our other friends, they don't typically want to contribute much to it. They really want us to plan the trip, and they kind of treat it as a guided tour of their own, really.
I was just going to say, yeah, we often travel, as Kim mentioned, we met a couple in China who actually live in the US. They're from Oklahoma. So she'll throw in my one request is we do this. And so of course I'm going to accommodate it. But if I ask her for anything else, she's just like, whatever else you guys had planned, whatever you were thinking of doing. And she just likes to show up for the rest of the trip.
Most of the time, people haven't even read the Google Doc itinerary that we put together. They just show up blind.
I will say I did. Scott has become more of a planner now. Sometimes when we have a lot going on, just between podcast things and different things. And so our recent trip to Curacao, he actually planned a lot more. And I got blamed for that. Did you not read the? So totally understand that.
Brittany and I will have a little bit of those bickerings too, because she'll fill it with a lot of stuff and I should probably go in and look at the document. And if it happens to be a trip where I really am only driving a rental car and don't really have to worry about figuring out transportation in a city, we have that dynamic going on just as well. So Kim gets to witness it all sometimes.
So it's not always perfectly smooth sailing, right?
Never is.
What tip, I guess, would you have for people to be able to, travel as a friend group? I liked your suggestion, Brittany, about, asking, or your one friend says, this is the one thing I want to do. I mean, I think that might be a great suggestion that you would say, everybody, okay, like chip in something, like what is high on your list to do? We've done that when traveled with our grown children, but like, what tip would you have for people traveling and planning a trip together?
Go ahead,
Kim.
My biggest tip would be to actually take the lead. Most people in a friend group won't actually take the lead to say, here are the dates we're going to go. Here's some hotels that we could stay in. I booked it. Who's coming? Like, they want someone to do it, and then they'll follow. And at least with the friend groups that I've traveled with, taking that first step to put it into action gets the whole group moving.
My tip would be that to stay flexible, because everyone's going to have different places they want to see or eat or activities they want to do. So I think if you're traveling with a friend group, obviously you're going to a destination hopefully you both want to go to or your group wants to go to and enjoy. But there has to be some flexibility. You can't just be completely hard on the schedule and not have any leeway, because with reality happening, everyone's going to have a different opinion, and you just have to let it flow a little bit and just kind of weave in and out of a fluid itinerary that everyone can enjoy. Because if you're traveling as a group, you want everyone to enjoy that experience. It's not just your vacation, it's their vacation too.
When you do a group travel like that, do you spend the entire time together, or do you have some time set aside where like you can kind of go off and just do your own thing and let everybody have a moment where they can go their own way inside of a location?
That's a great question. We do. Sometimes we're with each other most of the time, but most often we'll have some times away from each other. For example, we had mentioned we went to South Africa. After going to South Africa, we landed in New York. We spent a few days in New York. Jamal really wanted to go to was it a Yankees game?
Yankees game.
I had no interest. Absolutely no interest. Jamal's sister had no interest. So we decided to go to Delhi and grab some ice cream and watch The Bachelor in our Airbnb. While Jamal and his friend group, because we were also with another couple, and they went to the game and they enjoyed it. So I'm absolutely okay with spending some alone time away from Jamal and away from whoever else we're traveling with. We were actually just in Costa Rica, and Jamal and Zaina, Jamal's sister, they weren't able to make it on a hike. So Kim and I spent a girls' day just hiking out in the Costa Rican jungle, and we had a great day together.
Yeah, I would say if circumstances dictate in the moment, we do exactly what Brittany mentioned, but a lot of times our time away from each other is when we are in our own rooms at night. And when we first started traveling, that wasn't even a luxury, because to save money, we would always be hunkered down in the same hotel room too. So that space and luxury is something that's come with time. for us. But for the most part, we have never really like plugged it in to say, hey, we're going our separate ways, unless there has been something in an itinerary on a place where we've been where we just couldn't come to a consensus. And we said, all right, we're going to do this. You guys do this. We're going to meet back up here. But that's far few and in between, but it does happen.
And I think that's a great tip for people because you think, oh, we're doing this trip together. We literally are going to do everything together. But no, like if you had different couples, like go on a dinner date on your own, or like you said, go to a ball game, go do an activity that you like. So I think that's a great tip.
And so Jamal, one of my domestic things that's on my bucket list is to go on I'm a Braves fan. I want to go on a road trip with them. So like when they're doing a 3-city road trip, I want to go to all the games on that 3-city trip. I'm right there with you on that one.
I'm in New York, and I know at this point in time, it's not the original Yankee Stadium, but Yankee Stadium's iconic. It's like another time when we were in Chicago, I said, I have to go see a game at Wrigley Field. And I've been to Boston, but it hasn't been during baseball season. But you better believe I'm going to go see a game in Fenway one day. So I understand.
I can talk baseball all night, so we'll move on. Why don't you guys tell us a little bit about your podcast? So not only do you travel together as a friend group, you also decided that you would, as you said, you would start capturing this in a podcast. So tell us a little bit about that.
Our podcast is called Travel Squad Podcast. And our mission is to bring the excitement of travel into the podcast audio form. Back when we started, there weren't as many good podcasts as there are now. And so we were trying to listen to them, and they weren't capturing how exciting the anticipation of a trip coming up is, or when you come back for a trip, how you're on that high for a while. And so we wanted to bring that. And we also wanted to show people that you can work full time and you can still travel. You can have any type of a budget and you can still travel. So we wanted to give specific details on trips that we would take after work on a Friday, fly in before work on a Monday, and how we would make that happen, and exactly how much we spent and how we saved money if we didn't, have a big budget for it. And I think that's really been our mission over the last 5 years that we still hold today.
I have a colleague that one Monday morning we were talking, and so I asked her what she had done over the weekend, and she had actually traveled to Morocco. And I was like, you don't just travel to Morocco over a weekend. I mean, what are you doing? She's like, yeah, we went to Morocco. I think maybe it was a 3-day weekend for them, but
oh my gosh.
So it sounds like that might be a little bit of what you're talking about. Maybe not quite so extreme.
Yeah, usually not so extreme, but you guys have the luxury of being on the East Coast. And as you guys were talking about, you prefer international travel. Well, it's so easy for you guys because you're around so many different islands, and then you're not far from Europe. Whereas for us, we have to go across the entire United States and then still go to Europe, So for you guys, it's a little bit easier to do those international trips.
It's funny because we actually just talked about that. For me to go to the West Coast, though, I was in Las Vegas last week for work, and it took all day to get there. Mm-hmm. So, early my day and then get there in the afternoon, we just kind of look at it as when you're going overseas like that, you're going overnight, you're going to sleep, most likely overnight anyway. So it doesn't really count into that as much as like when we're traveling from the East Coast to the West Coast, and it just literally takes you all day long to get there.
Yeah, that's such a great point that you make, Brittany, because we just don't think about that, right? We can hop to the Caribbean, we can hop, to Europe a lot quicker than if you're on the West Coast. That's interesting.
At some point in the near future, I'm going to move to Florida, and then I'll be following in your footsteps with all of the Caribbean travel.
It really is. I tell you, I don't know if you have a certain place that you're looking at to move, maybe be closer to a hub type airport, because for us, we actually have to travel like to either Atlanta or New York to get to South Florida. So you might want to keep that in mind when you're looking.
Choice. That's true. If you have a choice. But we have found the good thing is, even though now we have a connection airport, if we use things like points and stuff like that, thankfully it's sometimes even cheaper than it was to fly out of Atlanta. And that was something that we weren't expecting. That was actually a surprise to us. So that's been
a nice perk.
Yeah, nice little perk.
Yeah, but so going back to the podcast, you started your travels and you're 5 years into it now?
5 years into the podcast, traveling together, we're going on 8 or 9, if I'm doing quick math correct in my head. So long time.
That's great. In the podcast, do you guys focus on any specific areas, or you're just documenting kind of what you do?
So I think our podcast, we try to capture as much as we can travel wise. So we will follow all of our trips, whether they be international, domestic, or hiking trips to national parks. We also like to do roundups, best cities to visit in summer or best destinations to visit in certain seasons, certain months. Sometimes we'll focus on the credit card aspect of things. Sometimes we'll have guests on who specialize in different departments of the travel industry. So we just try to capture as much as we can travel-wise.
We've always put out a Travel Tuesday episode weekly, and those are typically 30 minutes to an hour long. And then more recently, we started putting out mini episodes on Fridays that are about 15 minutes or 10 minutes long that are more of those quick hits, like 5 apps you should have on your phone when you travel, or 10 medications you should always travel with. So we have a lot of stories about not having medications or needing medications when you're traveling. So little things like that, just kind of bonus episodes that aren't necessarily documenting trips that we've taken, but still adding value to the traveler.
Where would you say, so for a lot of our listeners, like this will be the first time that they've heard of Travel Squad podcast. So where would you have them start maybe in your podcast lineup to kind of get a feel for who you are, or like how could they kind of find content that they might be interested in?
I think our website would be the best place to search for it. travelsquadpodcast.com/episodes. There's a search bar in there, so you can search destinations that maybe you're interested in traveling to. That's actually how most people find us, right, guys? People are going on a trip, they're searching in Spotify, they come across our show. But you can do the same on our website. Everything is categorized there. We also have different categories for national park trips, international trips, US trips, or tips. So you can kind of just see what pops up when you click on the category too.
And that's perfect, because if you are looking then for hiking destinations and you guys advice, like that would be, you guys would be totally the place to go for that. Because that's not, we haven't done, besides just little short hikes. So,
a friend recently said to us that she wasn't really into podcasts because she feels like she has to start at the very beginning. And I thought that was really interesting because although some podcasts are like a series, a lot of travel podcasts aren't necessarily. And I told her, why don't you just pick up where you find an interesting episode and then just bounce around in that? And I think that can be said for most travel podcasts. You don't have to start at the very beginning. If you see something that was just aired a week or two ago, and that's what really captures you, listen there and then go back into the archive to see what else there is that captivates you.
I think that's such a great point. So if somebody's on your website and they've binged on some of the podcast episodes and planning a trip, what other resources do you have out there for travelers?
On our website, we have a ton of trip itineraries. So the exact same trip that we've taken, the exact same trip that we have a podcast on, we have built out these PDF itinerary guides on them. For longer trips, like a week or 2 weeks, they could be 30 pages long, and it takes you through where to fly into, what to do on day 1, morning, afternoon, night, where to stay, where to eat, everything we did basically with the learnings that we had, how much it costs, squad tips, like buy your tickets early because the line is long. And we have quite a few of those now that some are paid that you can download for anywhere between $10 and $30, depending on the trip. So very, very affordable. But we also have a ton of free itineraries that Brittany has been doing so much work to develop so that anyone can download.
And those free itineraries are for the shorter, like 1 day, 2 days in a major US city doing something, just a quick little guide. So those are little teasers for people to just, one, find some good stuff to do, but really see the meat and potatoes of what are going to be in those other itineraries for those longer trips that we have more internationally, or week-long road trips that we've done, things of that nature.
It's almost like you're on the group trip with us because we are doing all the planning for you, and all you have to do is show up and have fun.
And then they can listen to the corresponding podcast episode, right? To kind of like hear about that trip and then have that. That's awesome. And because I think that is a big hurdle for people, is not like knowing where to even start when planning a trip. So you'll have done a lot of the work.
And that's sort of what we've been doing for a really long time is, we would get the Rick Steves guide. We would read that, and then we would listen to, something that he had recorded on that. And so between what he had written in the guide and what he was saying in the audio. That's really how we got started.
That's awesome. Now look at us.
So we kind of teased this before, but let's come back around and talk a little bit about budget, because when you're traveling with different groups of people, so like how do you make that piece of it work? Especially if people want to do like credit card points and miles and rewards and stuff like that.
I think you two would be way better to answer this one than me.
Well, in all honesty, sometimes we have not really talked about a budget, because if we're doing it domestically, a lot of times, a lot of us will fly Southwest. And for a very long time while we were traveling together, Kim was still in San Diego before she moved to Austin. So whatever the flight cost was for Kim, it was the same for us, and we knew it. And if it was going to be expensive, then we weren't going to do it or pivot to something else. Now that we're in different cities and trying to meet up somewhere when we get together, it's kind of harder, because then we'll say to ourselves, well, the flight for us is not very cheap during this day. It's better here. We'll see how it matches, and we'll try to coordinate that way. But in terms of an overall budget for a trip, it's never really spoken, because sometimes a lot of our bigger international ones are the guided tours, which usually give you a lot more bang for your buck. So we have been fortunate enough in our travel group to avoid that. Now, that's not to say that the topic of budget doesn't come up, because if we've taken a few too many trips recently or in the year, so to speak, and one of us throws out an idea, we'll say, hey, we can't swing that right now. How about this? And then we'll do it as a pivot or postpone that trip to be at a later time.
I also think too, when we're in the planning process, if Kim, for example, says, I want to stay at the Atlantis in Dubai, we're going to see, is that possible? And can we all make that happen? But I think in terms of budgeting, our friend group, we're all on the same level where we don't want to go super cheap, but we're also not going to go super expensive unless we have a specific reason to do so. And if we do have a specific reason to do so, then we'll try to fit it in, even if it's just for one night.
So who's the most bougie out of the travel group?
Well, that's easily going to be Kim. There's no denying that. Although in fairness to Kim, she mentioned earlier that Brittany's the one putting jam-pack from morning, noon, and night, something in there. And on our last trip that we all took together to Costa Rica, we were staying at some really nice hotels, resort hotels. And again, those were included with our guided package with Gate 1. It wasn't a guided tour, but they pieced together the hotels and everything like that. And I started to have the epiphany like Kim and say, man, as I'm getting older here, I need more downtime. I need to really enjoy these resorts. I told Brittany next time she's really out of luck here, we're slowing it down a little bit. So, those conversations are teased, and it will probably come into practice on the next couple of trips where we find that good balance of everybody getting what they want to some degree. But Kim is the bougie one, but Jamal's following right behind her on that.
Well, I think you've taught us something. We have not done a lot of these, planned trips, the booked tours or that kind of thing. Although I do get a lot of the emails, just like all the flight deals and the hotel deals. And some of them, it's like, wow, that really, including the airfare, that can be a really great deal. So we're definitely going to check out. I'll put a link to some of those in the show notes. We're definitely going to check those out. But that's a great point. That can be a great way to say, okay, like we kind of know going in, right? Everything's planned. Here's the price of the trip. Can you make it?
Mm-hmm. And my advice is absolutely do it, because was it 2017, Africa? 2018. So this was at the very early stages of my travels, and my travel budget was a lot smaller than it is now. Africa was quite expensive of a tour, somewhere around $5,000 for the Gate 1 week and a half tour. And so I doubted myself, and I decided not to go. And to this day, it is the biggest regret that I have in my life, because I could have, say, irresponsibly, quote unquote, charged it to a credit card. And today I would have had that paid off, and I would have those memories, and I wouldn't have that regret. So that's my philosophy with budgeting, is just do it and you'll figure it out.
I think there's some truth.
Yeah, I definitely think there's some truth to that. Yeah.
Especially because we like to focus on the memories, right? It's the memories that we're creating. And it's the whole reason that we do a podcast. We've said before that if no one ever listened to a word of our podcast that we published out there, thankfully that's not true, but if no one ever did, we're capturing in our own words, in our own voices, the memories that we've created through our travels. And so that's irreplaceable. Our family, our kids, our grandkids, their kids, whatever, will have these stories that we tell about our travels right from our own mouths. And so I think creating the memories is a huge part of what we are all doing when we travel.
Creating the memories while traveling, but what you said, I wholeheartedly agree, because I've said that a million times, is my favorite thing about the podcast, other than really helping people learn to travel better, give them tips, advice, etc., is really the fact that when I'm old and gray, I will have digital audio to go back and listen to re-listen to my trips, bring back those memories, and family, kids, anybody else, they have that same opportunity, and my story, or our story, really lives forever.
So we have 3 questions that we want to ask each of you that we kind of wrap up with. But first, I just wanted to see, is there any other, tips or advice or anything else that you want to share about, traveling together, or just about your podcast in general?
I would say when you're traveling with a group of people, there always has to be give and take. There's been lots of times where Kim has suggested something, maybe more on the bougie end, that we didn't want to do, but we're all on the trip together, and she needs to have her opportunity, where I've wanted to do stuff and everybody has catered to me to do it. So when you're traveling with a group of people, whether it be once or multiple times, there's always that give and take. Just give and not necessarily take, because it's going to make it for a more enjoyable experience with everybody when everybody gets a little bit of what it is that they want and are looking for out of that trip.
I'll add on to that too. I think that traveling as a group sometimes has a negative cloud over it. People think we're going to fight or we're going to get tired of each other. But actually, I feel quite the opposite. Even if those things do occur on one-off basis, my friendship with these two would never have been as strong as it is today had we not been traveling so much together. And then, of course, have this podcast together. I mean, Brittany and I have been friends since we were 12, but we've never been better friends than we are today. And my friendship with Jamal as well. So travel can really, really bring you together and keep you together as friends.
Well, great. Let's jump into, these are the same questions we ask all of our guests. So the first is, what's the favorite place you've ever visited?
Ooh, that's such a good question. I love this question. For me, I would have to say Uganda. I don't know if you guys have been at all, but we got to experience land safari, river safari, and then jungle safaris and jungle treks, hiking to see chimpanzees and mountain gorillas in the wild. So that's got to be my number one place that I've visited.
We're doing our first trip to Africa in October of this year. And so
where are you guys going to?
We're starting in Cairo and going to do Giza first. Then we'll travel to Kenya and do a 10-day safari. Then we're going to leave from there and go to South Africa down to Cape Town.
I'm super excited for you guys. You guys are going to have a blast. Africa might be my favorite continent as a whole, but to not be repetitive and say Uganda also, which is top on my list as well. Not necessarily number one. It's give and take, right? Is it nature or is it city? And I know we had that conversation earlier, but I'm going to have to go with Japan. Japan's probably been one of my favorite countries that I've ever visited. For the food, the sights, the history, the culture, the people, some of the most friendly in the world, cleanliest cities I've ever been in. Japan, top of my list for sure.
Did you have a favorite place in Japan?
I would have to say Osaka was maybe my favorite, because I'm a foodie and that's a foodie place in Osaka. But Kyoto, you get that classical architecture and it's really not a metropolis at all. I mean, there's 1.4 million people in there, but there's no skyscrapers. You really have that classic Japan. So it's tough. I can't say one or the other, but if I'm going to go off of food and just have to give an answer, I'll go with Osaka.
That's consistent with what we heard this past weekend from someone who just returned.
Kim, what about you?
My favorite country is Thailand. I didn't go with these two. I went with a group of three other people, and we spent about 11 days there going through the southern islands, Bangkok. All of it was amazing, beautiful, really, really good food, extremely affordable, nice people, lots of tourists there. I like the cherry on top of this trip was the full moon party on Koh Phangan. And I'm so glad I did this in my 20s because I don't think I could hang now in my 30s, but it was epic and I'll never forget it.
So what's still on your bucket list?
For me, Antarctica. I really want to make it to Antarctica and do a cruise out there. That's just going to be the icing on the cake. I mean, that's most likely the last continent that somebody needs to hit. If they've been to, 6 other ones, it's probably Antarctica. And one of these days, I'm going to make it. That's for sure.
So we're trying to organize a listener cruise to Antarctica for 2026.
Ooh. Well, sign us up for that because if that's the case,
you guys come and go with us, which it's funny because I think it's like that's the one place that any guest that we've talked to that we talk about. And so I think all of our guests on our podcast are going to be hopefully will then be on the Antarctica cruise with us. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, I'm looking forward to it. Keep us posted on when it's happening.
I've been actually eyeing New Zealand a lot recently. I would love to go to both the North and South Islands, more particularly the South Island, because it's more known for its like hiking, the glaciers that go in there, the wildlife that you can see, the landscapes are amazing. And you could spend easily 3 weeks exploring New Zealand. So I would love to go there.
My bougie side is going to come out when I say this, but my next place I really, really want to go is the south of France. I want to go to Nice. I want to go to Saint-Tropez. I want to be on the beach on a daybed, drinking cocktails by the ocean.
Doesn't sound bougie to me. That sounds like a great trip.
Right?
And then I guess finally is, where are you guys going next?
So Jamal and I are actually headed to Iceland. We leave on the 4th of July. We're going to spend 7 days exploring the southern parts of Iceland, doing a lot of hiking and doing a Zodiac boat on a lagoon.
It's on our bucket list.
It definitely is. Yes. And the only reason that we haven't done New Zealand, of course, Australia, because again, so for us, then we have to go across the United States, right? To do that is we need the 3 weeks or like you mentioned, right? To make that trip worthwhile.
But it's something that's got to happen.
Yes.
And matter of fact, I keep saying we've got to do it before we do Antarctica because I really wanted Antarctica to be my last continent.
Makes sense. A lot of people do consider it the last continent they visit. So you got to make that happen soon for your cruise.
That's true.
We have a way of figuring out how to fit a lot of travel into unplanned time.
So while they are in Iceland, I'm going to be going on a Mexican Riviera cruise with my family and a huge group that we're going with. It goes out of Long Beach to Cabo, Puerto Vallarta, and Mazatlan.
Nice.
That's an area that we really want to explore. We spent a good bit of time in Cancun and that, Riviera Maya area, but we would love to explore more of Mexico.
If you need tips, let us know. We've been all over Mexico.
That sounds good. Well, and that's what I was going to say. So now we have we've been told that, once you do a safari, like it's kind of like an addiction. So we'll have to go check out, your content on Uganda and any of these other places, right? Before we plan our travels.
I would recommend Uganda be the next one because what you just said is very true. One safari and you have the itch and you just want to keep on going on them and you'll have a great time in Uganda.
Yeah, that one sounds amazing.
So Kim, Brittany, Jamal, thank you for coming on our show. And for all of our listeners, go check them out. They're the Travel Squad podcast.
And besides your website, besides the podcast, where else can people find you and connect with you on social media?
We are Travel Squad Podcast on all the socials.
Well, thank you guys.
Thanks so much for having us.
Yes, thank you.
Have you ever had that discussion, Melissa, with a group of friends that ends something like, we should all do a trip together sometime?
Yes, and it's just so hard to get everybody to commit, right, to a date. I mean, sometimes just even as hard as, planning to go out to dinner. It's just hard to nail that down and make that plan. So that's why we wanted to bring the Travel Squad onto our show and share their experiences and how they consistently make that travel happen. And even now, so many years later, they're still traveling together.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was interesting. They do some travel on their own and stuff like that. So there's a good mix but it sounds like they're still doing a number of trips together.
Yeah, like Kim and Brittany said, like they make a point to do that once a year trip. And I think often, we just get so busy and it's just hard to get everybody's schedules. But just that tip of saying, somebody taking the lead, right? And here's that tip of saying, here's the date, and making that plan happen and saying who's in, who's out.
And so, Melissa, this time we were really having a hard time coming up with the right title for this episode.
Yeah, so I see a lot of reels on social media that are like, when the girls trip gets out of the group chat, or when the group trip gets out of the group chat. And so it just kind of reminded me of that is just that concept of, and of course, then those reels will show like what happened and, the fun experiences and stuff like that you can have once somebody takes the lead, right? And gets that ball rolling. And then everyone says that this is just more important to us than whatever else we may have going on.
Well, I think there were some really good tips that they mentioned in the interview that we might want to highlight. So the first one was that they look for sales and they let that guide their next trips.
Yeah, and that's something that we have talked about a lot, right? And a huge tip for if you want to travel more affordably, have that list of places that you might be interested in going. And then when you see that great deal, that you hop on. So I think that's a great tip for a group trip. And then they even talked about how do they make that work with people in different cities and, just everybody kind of keeping an eye on what they can make work.
Matter of fact, there's a ton of huge sales going on right now, both airfares and hotels that, if you're out there watching this, man, there's some amazing trips that you could be taking.
Yeah, and if you keep an eye on things like Thrifty Traveler and Going, a lot of times I'll see those deals pop into my inbox and I'll share those on Instagram stories and stuff like that. So we're going to put a link to those in the show notes. It might just be something that if you are not familiar with that and aware of that, that can be a great way to just kind of keep an eye on that. And if you, as you're looking in your inbox, and a good thing to remember about those airfare deals is that if you book a flight, a lot of people think, airfare is never refundable, but it is for 24 hours. And so, hop on those deals and then just see what you can make work out.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I saw one sale yesterday. It was Virgin Atlantic, and this was a miles deal, right? So for people spending their miles, $6,000 from the US to the UK.
6,000 points.
6,000 points. Sorry.
Yeah. But that's really inexpensive. And
that's economy. So, you're not going to fly up front for 6,000 points. However, for only like 28,000 or almost 29,000 points, you could fly first class.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible.
So there are some really good deals out there. Stay on top of them. Follow our social media because Melissa will post some of those great deals out there. Just look to see what's on sale. And then when you find a great deal, jump on it and then book your trip. Another thing that they mentioned was they found that guided trips work for them and can really be a good value for their money.
Yeah, and I also keep an eye on these. I have several different ones that I look at from time to time, and they gave a couple of great suggestions, which we're also going to link, the ones that they talked about. But yeah, looking at those, like you just couldn't set up that kind of trip for what they charge. And the way that they're probably able to do that, right, is because they, have it as a group and then they've negotiated these rates and stuff like that. But it can be, they did some fantastic trips. They talked about going to China, Machu Picchu,
Africa
as well. And so taking a look at that. So, just not always thinking, oh, we can't, this isn't affordable and we can't go to all these places.
Yeah. I want to say that the China trip was like $1,500 or something like that.
Yeah. I think it was less than that. So,
yeah. So that's pretty amazing. And then if you've got that group of friends that have been talking about a trip for several years now, Kim's advice was really just take the lead and go get it planned. Stop waiting. And sometimes that first step is all that's needed to get the ball rolling.
And that's absolutely true. And here's the thing about that is that everybody who is in the group, let's say, everybody can't plan that trip. Like it's never going to get planned. We talked about that when we recently traveled. with our daughter and her family is that they kind of said, here's what we would like to do. And we are more of the trip planners. And so we really kind of took the lead on, working out the details of the hotels or the Airbnbs, the vacation rentals, the trains, that kind of thing. I mean, they had booked the main thing, which is the airfare to and from, but somebody has to say, this is what we're going to do. And this is probably a good time to reference back to our trip planning episode, which was episode 20, how to plan a trip step by step. And so as a part of a group, like somebody might be good at finding the hotels and enjoy that. Somebody might be good at finding the activities. If not, one person might want to do all of that, but that could be a great way to kind of split up, for time wise or for people's skills or, whatever, is kind of splitting that up.
Yeah, that was one of the things I really liked about what they were talking about is, Brittany and Kim spend most of the time, I think, thinking about the trip and what they want to do and stuff like that. Then they take that and they hand it over to Jamal and are like, okay, make this happen from a travel perspective.
Yeah, the transportation, because that's one thing that I always tell you, hey, rent a car for such and such, right? Or let's make sure we've got the inner, trains or that kind of thing. Yeah. So they even talked about how they split up those duties.
And kind of on that, you were talking about the trip that we did with our kids. And, I thought Jamal made a great point where he said, got to be some give and take.
Yeah, absolutely. And we haven't really talked a lot about that yet. So we're going to have an episode to come. So stay tuned for that. But one of the ways that we also did that I thought about as we were interviewing them was that we would take turns because we had kids on this trip, right? So we would take turns kind of letting them go out, right? And then there was sometimes that we went out and did our own things. We met some friends in London. We had another date night just for us. And so that kind of gave us a chance to do our own thing. And then that gave them a chance to have just their family, right? Having a couple of evenings just with them and kind of doing their own thing without us tagging along. So don't think that just because you have this group trip, like they were saying, you have to spend every time together and you have to do every meal together. That's a great way to, go out to dinner on, your own, just one couple or something like that.
But if you do, and you just find that it's easy to spend all the time together and to do everything together, that's fine too. And that's the beauty of travel is it's whatever is good for you, not necessarily just the way that we do it.
Absolutely.
It's always fun to hear the experiences of other travelers. Melissa and I spend quite a bit of our time when out and about talking to people about their travels. Some have a tremendous amount of experience and are just waiting for that next adventure. Others have a deep wanderlust to travel more, but just don't know where to start. And that's why we love bringing this content to you every week. Whether it's our firsthand experiences or seeking the knowledge of others like the Travel Squad, we desire to help you travel more and better. Do you have a memorable experience traveling with the group? Email us, scott@sunshinetravelers.com, and let us know. We are always inspired by your travel stories.
We hope you enjoyed this episode and found some inspiration to help you with your travel journeys. If you could take a moment to leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform, it would be greatly appreciated. Your 5-star reviews help us get discovered by others and possibly featured on your favorite platform. Don't forget to follow or subscribe to our podcast to get notified of new episodes as they are released. You can also find us on Instagram at Sunshine Travelers Podcast. Remember, that's travelers with 1 L. Most importantly, please share it with your friends and help them catch the travel bug. You never know, they may become your greatest travel companion.